and welcome to Weekly MTG, the only show that comes to you metaphorically from inside Wizards of the Coast headquarters. We have a fantastic show today, one I've been waiting literally all of previous season to do because we have two of what may be familiar faces to you, Emily Teng and James Mendez Hodes, who you might recognize from the Building Worlds Roundtable that kicked off a lot of what we were talking about with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. And at that point, they were a little handcuffed because we hadn't previewed much. They could only talk about things in generalities. They couldn't say, I designed this sweet card, or we had this specific design. Today, all bets are off. They can talk about everything. The full set's live. So we're going to let Emily and Mendez answer your questions. We've got a bunch of questions that we pulled from social media, a bunch of things and stories that they wanted to share. So we're going to go through all of that. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end for your questions. Completely unleashed, gloves off, all that sort of jazz. Before we get to that, we have a little bit of news, just in case you missed it this morning. We unveiled the next super drop from Secret Lair. Of course, the headliner is Secret Lair and Street Fighter. So this one has 8 flavorful Street Fighter characters on Magic cards ready to battle on your tabletop. You can get this one for $39.99 in non-foil. Traditional foil is $49.99. If you're a fan of Street Fighter, these are going to push all the right buttons for you. Pun completely intended and not planned before this moment. I'll note that these are all going on sale tomorrow. Next up in the drop is the Little Walkers drop. So you get 5 little chibi walkers. The non-foil drop is $29.99. Traditional foil, $39.99. Next up is introducing Kaito Suzuki. So these are reprints of cards from Magic's history, but featuring the Magic's newest Planeswalker from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty in art on each of these cards. The non-foil is $29.99. The traditional foil is $39.99. Next up, we have another in our artist series, special guest Yuko Shimizu. Wow, I mispronounced that. Shimizu. There we go. For borderless cards with art that is amazing and strange and eclectic and beautiful. Non-foil is $29.99. Traditional foil is $39.99. She's an award-winning Japanese illustrator who is based in New York City. And she put together these 4 pieces for 4 spirits. Next up, we have Showcase Neon Dynasty. These come in just the neon ink foil treatment, which is something new that we were doing with Kamigawa. You can get these for $49.99. And then next up, Shades Not Included. These are basic lands done by artist Ben Schnook, which if you're in the Magic community, you may recognize that name from some of his previous work. This is his first pass at doing actual Magic cards, and they are gorgeous. You can get these in non-foil for $29.99 or traditional foil in $39.99. Next up, Pictures of the Floating World. So these are the 5 hideaway lands from back in Lorwyn, done in the Ukiyo-e style. So Windbrisk Heights, Sheldock Isle, Hollowtooth Hollow, Spinerock Knoll, and Mosswort Bridge. They're all gorgeous. They come in non-foil for $29.99, traditional foil for $39.99. Next up is Kamigawa, the manga, the cards. So these are all based off this is all art that is found in the manga about Kamigawa. So this is $29.99 for non-foil, and traditional foil is $39.99. Then we've got the bundles. So that's all the drops. So the non-stop non-foil bundle, that's the middle one that you're looking at there. That one is $188.99. That includes 7 different drops. The full of foils bundle are all of the foil bundles. So you'll notice that that one differs by 1 because the Kamigawa one only comes in that neon foil treatment. That one is $278.99 for all 8 drops. And of course, the bundle is both of those drops, the nonstop non-foil and the full of foil bundle. Get it all together, $428.99. Those go on sale tomorrow. Check out secretlair.wizards.com. Whew. Okay. I got through that all as fast as I could because you're not here to hear me talk. You are here to get stories and behind the scenes information from Emily and Mendez. So let's start, just in case people watching didn't watch the roundtable or weren't aware of that. Emily and Mendez, why don't you share exactly what your role was on the set, what you did, and let's start with Emily.
Yeah, I'm world building game designer. I was the world building set lead for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty.
Great. And Mendez?
I am a cultural consultant. I have worked on, I think, almost every Magic card since Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. But Neon Dynasty was my first and one of my most thorough cultural consulting assignments, helping with cultural design, cultural development, and coordinating with other cultural consultants as well, to make sure that that Neo Kamigawa's culture glows as brightly as possible, metaphorically as well as literally.
Someone's been following all the spoilers and all.
I didn't plan that one out, so if it falls flat,
no, I dig it. It works. It was about as good as my pushing buttons one earlier. So we are gonna, like I said, I have a bunch of questions that we've taken off of social, and then I know Emily and Mendez want to talk about. So I'm just gonna start asking them questions. If you have questions for Emily and or Mendez, put them in chat. We're gonna have a focused Q&A session at the end, so I may or may not see them heading into that point. But definitely feel free to put them in chat as you think of them. So Emily, let's start with you, because one of the first things we did with Kamigawa was we introduced the world to that new planeswalker, Kaito Suzuki. And I'd love to hear a bit more about his creation, who worked on him, any other sort of behind the scenes stories you may have on Kaito.
So, I mean, going into Kamigawa, we knew we wanted to have a ninja planeswalkers. So then it was really a process of figuring out, like, how do we execute on it to make it feel like, you know, he's the ninja. I can't speak too much to like the design side, like the card mechanics or anything, but like from like a character creation design, we really wanted him to. I mean, like ninjas have been historically like blue-black, so we tried to build that into like his personality, his abilities, his backstory, tie it all together that way. And we worked with Hiromi also. They helped us on Kaito's design. So Hiromi Kota as another cultural consultant, they were really involved in like card design and world building and stuff. And I think they're actually doing like was it Twitter threads every day talking about
every day.
Yeah. Their Twitter is I think it's just Hiromi Kota, at Hiromi Kota, and every day around 3:00. So we've got one probably coming up soon where they talk a little bit about their work on the set too. So check that out if you're interested in some more behind the scenes stuff. If you're watching this, I assume you are. So yeah, and so what was the process like? Let me ask that a different way. Was the process different for Kaito than it was for other planeswalkers, Emily?
I really, yeah, I don't really know because Kaito's, I think trying to think, the only, Kaito's the first only new planeswalker that I worked on. Trying to figure out like what I'm trying to run through.
You're trying to
I
do the
remember
math
this
of like
well.
what can I say publicly, what can't I say? What was that, James?
I think
Or
yeah, I was also there for I gave a lot of feedback on some of the early Kaito design. Kaito is, I think, the third iteration. We went through a couple of different concepts which emphasize sort of different aspects of what a ninja could be. A lot of the different ninja designs you'll see in Kamigawa are exploring like different aspects of what historical Japanese espionage looked like. And Kaito was sort of supposed to fall right in the middle. He has a really diverse experience of all the different factions in Kamigawa. He's been an Imperial. He's been involved with the Reckoners. He's been involved with the Futurists. But he's also kind of a synthesis of ideas that were present in some of the older Planeswalker designs. One of which was focused on more on counterintelligence, and then the other of which was focused more on like infiltration. And so Kaito is kind of in between, but most importantly, he has a Tanuki. I mean, that's what we're all here for.
That is the
right?
most important part. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is definitely the most important
part.
That's
where the Kami lives, right? The Kami of the start. Himoto.
Yeah, then, Hiromi picked that name.
Yeah. Oh, and also the nickname, Pompon-chan.
Yeah.
Which I think, I don't remember clearly. I think it just means like bang bang or something, like a spark. Oh. Firecracker spark or something.
Oh, sparks. I see what you did there. Very clever. Yeah. Because planeswalkers. Yeah.
Well, and I know Hiromi did a lot of the work creating names and working on translations as well. So maybe they'll cover that in one of their Twitter threads.
Yeah.
Okay, James, let's move to you. One of the areas that you started to touch on in the round table, but again, you couldn't dive too deep into it, was talking about armor and weaponry that was shown on the cards. So what are some of the common pieces of samurai or ninja armor that you helped incorporate into the set?
Oh yeah. So armor design is really, really fun because it's one of the elements of character design that's like most prominent and most obvious. So Japanese historical armor is it's really fun. It's made of a lot of different materials. It's still mostly metal by weight, but you're also going to see, in addition to metal plates, there's going to be chainmail components, lacquered wood and silk, lots and lots of different materials, leather sometimes, all kinds of different things. So ninja tended to wear more chainmail components for flexibility. And then samurai would wear like larger plates to deflect like arrows, bullets, etc. But one of the most common, or one of the most important elements of armor was the vambrace, or they call it kote, I guess, in Japanese armor design. It goes over the back of your forearm, and it's one of the most important armor pieces because it was used the way that you might use a small shield. You could use it really aggressively to block and bash. And we also made sure that you're not going to see a lot of like spiky vambraces because you want to be able to throw a block up and have a blade or an attack slide off of it so that it's easier to counterattack.
I think you brought that up in one of Kaito's early designs too. It's like we came up with like School Ninja did with the vambraces, but that they were all spiky, and that was one thing you pointed out. I was like, Ninja wouldn't do that.
Yeah, he's going to get swords stuck in there. It's going to be inconvenient. It's going to be awkward for everyone involved.
Well, speaking of swords, you again, you hinted at this in the round table, but there are a number of different kinds of long swords that are seen in the set. Can you talk about the different types and sort of their significance that we see on several of the cards?
Yes. So I think Kamigawa has too many swords. Now that I'm live, you can't stop. You can't edit that out. So you heard it here. Kamigawa has too many swords. I want to see more different weapons also. But yeah, many different longsword designs present in Kamigawa. Going like forward in history, there's some older designs which are a little bit longer, heavier, and have a more obvious curve. So those are
Mm-hmm.
more like the tachi design. The tachi is an early Japanese sword that's optimized for horseback use. It's generally used one-handed out of the saddle because you need your other hand for the reins. When you're using that, even if you're using it on foot, very often you'd move in such a way that it would mimic the motion of a galloping horse to create the appropriate momentum. But of course, Kamigawa is meant to represent a pretty wide range of history, from like the Heian era when the touch first became popular, up through the Warring States period when we saw the invention of swords like the katana. So you're going to
Mm-hmm.
see like a pretty broad diversity. The katana is a little bit shorter and a little bit lighter usually. It became especially popular when samurai stopped riding horses all the time and started firing muskets all the time. It's a little bit lighter and easier for a samurai on foot who's primarily like shooting bullets at people. Um, so yeah, especially some of the imperial characters,
Mm-hmm.
who are meant to evoke like the Heian era court, especially in their visual design, are going to have the Toch type sword. So the Silver Fur Master, Seven Tail Mentor. I think there's even a Wandering Emperor card where she has a Toch. And
Okay. Sean,
then
can we throw those up? I'm a
yeah,
visual learner. I need to see.
yeah,
Okay, so what are we looking at
yeah.
here?
That looks like a touch to me. Maybe even a little big for one, maybe even closer to an Odach, like a great sword. But yeah, there's the more prominent curve there, and also the fact that the ties are on the left of it, um, mean that you'd be tying that to the left side of your belt, and it would be hanging blade down. So yeah, that is definitely a touch. Now that I look at it more closely, katana's worn blade up usually. Atacha's worn blade down, and then there are some interstitial designs like from the like Muromachi period, which could be interpreted either as a katana or a touch. Look forward to the
Okay.
extensive sword guy argument that will follow this on Twitter. Yeah, that's definitely a touch. He's wearing it in a really
Okay.
weird way, but he's been clearly sitting there for a while. But yeah, the very pronounced curve is that's indicative of like early Japanese like horse designs. So this guy, I don't know if he has a horse, but he probably has a motorcycle.
Motorcycles as modern day
Probably.
horses.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's move from rats and horses to this is also a question we got on Twitter, but we knew we kind of wanted to talk about this anyway. So Emily, we have exactly one insect ninja in the set, and it's super cool. But there's just one. What's the story behind there being exactly one insect in the set?
Okay, so pretty early on, we had this intense discussion about no longer having any Orochi on Kamigawa. Um,
Hmm.
so, as part of that discussion, we were throwing out ideas of what is a primarily green aligned um, species to replace them. Um, we tossed out ideas for like uh, anthropomorphic folk based on snow leopards or snow monkeys or boars or Shiba Inu, which would have been adorable. But and the one that actually appealed to us most was Nantuko. So we went into the concept push. The concept push is where we get a bunch of artists and like they draw everything that ends up in the world guide. We went into the concept push still uncertain if we wanted Orochi or not. So we decided to do some visual exploration of what the Nantuko would look like just in case. Uh, Obviously, we ended up keeping the Orochi; they're still around. Um, but Zach, the art director, he loved the Nantuko design so much. He was like, we gotta get them in the set somewhere." So we ended up with just the one.
Yeah, that's Springleaf Avenger there.
I too was on Team Insects. Like, the
I
Orochi are
believe they're
cool, but I
based on like.
really like invertebrates.
I was just gonna say, I think they're based on praying mantises, like orchid mantis. Is that a thing?
Okay,
Yep, I've seen those.
very cool. All right, well, let's go back to Mendez. Something you said earlier kind of perked up my ears. You were talking about the influences of what the imperial court was based on, and sort of different eras that influenced what the Kamigawa court looked like. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So, one of the periods in Japanese history when the Emperor of Japan and the imperial court were most influential was the Heian era. That ran until I think the late 1100s. But it was a period characterized by the court, the imperial court, was based in Heian-kyo, around where Kyoto is today, and all of the political power was concentrated in and around the imperial family, and sometimes in the person of the emperor himself. So this was the time period that kind of defined classical Japanese chivalry, and as the power of the imperial courtiers started to wane, these provincial warrior families started to get more and more power, and these guys were the forerunners of what eventually, a couple hundred years later, became the samurai. So a lot of the imperial cards and the white cards, you're going to see kind of older looking, even if it's like a robot, or a modern type character. You're going to see a lot of sort of grand stately elegance and pieces inspired by like that Heian period, and armor and weapons which evoke that period of like very classical archetypical chivalry in Japanese history.
Hmm, okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. Next on my list of questions, Emily, I thought I think you had a little bit of a story here. We've had a lot of people who've noted that they love the flavor and everything behind the card. You are already dead, which is it's a pretty simple common, but it's kind of a big hit. What's the story behind that card?
So yeah, there's a lot of there were a lot of like anime and Japanese pop culture tropes that we drew on in this set. Um, you Are Already Dead is one of them. It's like we had this whole big list that we came up with, and then the design team went and made cards out of them. And like usually, whenever cards are created, they get placeholder names, which are not final. They're just meant to, be a placeholder until we go through the creative text process and we get them final name. For this card, it came in with the name "You Are Already Dead," and it went out the door with the name "You Are Already Dead." It did not change once at all during the entire process. During the creative text part of this, we explored some other options. You know, maybe shortening it to "Already Dead" or something else
Hmm.
entirely that did not contain any of those four words. Um, and at the very end, we were just like, I don't think it does us any favors to not just be really straightforward about this trope. Everyone loves it. Um, and yeah, so I just stuck. Although we did get some comments after the fact of like, I cannot believe this card has kept the name throughout the entire process.
Yeah, that's pretty rare. That we just nail it on the first time and it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that's just partly of how uh, how just clean the whole package was, like the mechanics and the name and the art and everything. It was just
Hmm.
it works so well together. It's like, why fix it if it's not broken?
Yeah.
So
Um, Mendez, in your quest to say there are too many swords in Kamigawa, there were two in this one. What kind of swords are these?
Um, it's hard to tell what the sword that did the already deading is. That could be That could be a katana, a touch, maybe even something bigger. The ogre sword is straight and double edged, so we might call that a tsurugi. Um, that's more like a if you look back at like the Kofun period and the time before Japanese warriors started riding horses, you saw a lot more straight sword designs, which were similar to Korean or Chinese designs, which influenced them. And then in the Edo period, when once again there weren't any wars, you started to see some straight swords reappearing again. So
right.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, weekly MTG. Come for the magic card stories, stay for the history lesson. Uh I'm learning more on this show than like the rest of them combined. Um James, let's stick with you.
All
Speaking
right.
of art, some of the best beloved art in this set are on the marches. So
Oh
it's a
yeah.
rare cycle of cards,
Marches are great.
and there are multiple versions of the marches, but those are based off of real world shrines, correct?
Right. Yeah. So this is something I remember having a conversation about like early in the world guide process, maybe even I think before the world guide was finished. We talked about these kinds of Japanese shrines that are they're meant to be carried exactly like that, just like you see the by frog people. Um, so they're carried on the shoulders of whatever the biggest people you are who are the same height, whatever the biggest people you have in the party who are in the same height, and they're commonly used for festivals. The monks or priests who run a shrine will hoist it up onto their shoulders, and they'll take it down into the center of town for a big party. These were also commonly used in monk riots when monks didn't like some political decision that the emperor or a prominent lord had made. The monks would riot, and they'd get their shrine, and then they'd run down into the middle of town with the shrine, yelling and waving weapons sometimes, and loudly complaining about how the political decision was bad, and therefore everyone was going to get reborn as a flatworm or something else no one wants to be reborn as. Um, so yeah, very common feature in monastic political complaining.
The shrines. I think we had considered doing that as part of the Green Aligned faction, the Order of Jukai, like
Mhm.
saying like they would use these, they would um, carry these giant shrines and put it somewhere and basic and summon a kami out of it and basically like a giant spirit bomb. I don't think we actually ended up doing that or showing that on any cards, but I do remember discussing it. So
I would have felt very
Well,
sorry for the artisan whose job it was to make that thing. It's like, I made you this beautiful shrine. What are you going to do with it?
blow it up.
explode it.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, speaking of things that didn't make it into the set, was there anything that that was created in world building that you were disappointed didn't make it into the set?
um, I don't know about disappointed, but there is definitely like okay, so I might have gone a little crazy with details. Because like I know I definitely wrote way too much in the world guide than could ever make it onto card set. Um, there's a bit about like for example the kitsune, they
Hmm.
how they have secret doorways into and out of the Golden Tail Academy through the sand of the Zen Gardens. Um,
Mm.
I, I I remember also writing something about like uh, Otawara is actually secretly sinking and no one knows why. Um, and it's supposed to be a big secret, but then, that didn't show up anywhere.
And
So
it's still a big secret until
it's
just
still a big
now.
secret, exactly.
Mendez, what about you?
Um, like I feel like these might eventually make it in, but if y'all could have been there for the conversations about the other color ninja, I should say. But yeah, we had concepts for ninja from all five colors, representing different aspects of again historical Japanese espionage. So
Hmm.
there were, for example, we talked about green ninja who might have been more similar to like the Iga mono of um, the Warring States period who had really advanced forestry skills based on coming from this mountainous forested region. And then we also had ideas for Red Ninja, who focused more on battlefield sabotage and skirmishing. And then White Ninja, who were focused on counterintelligence and stopping other ninja. So maybe sometime in the future of the future.
All right. Next up, we'll stick with Mendez. So Ogre Head Helm is both
I love this guy.
it's a really powerful card. Every time I see the art on this, it makes me giggle a little bit. But there is a real world analog to this, correct?
So, yeah. So the real world Ogre Head. So, of course, Japanese helmet designs got very big and very elaborate. It's the other most important armor piece for obvious reasons. But Japanese helmets were especially important for generals because seeing that crest on the general's helmet was how you knew where the general was, even on a battlefield that's covered in flags and ensigns. And eventually, the general's positioning helmets got so big and so elaborate with these huge painted paper mache crests and designs on them. They got so big that the general stopped wearing them. So you'd have a guy whose only job was to hold your helmet on a pole and run around with you, and that was your standard bearer. And then you just wear some regular helmet that fit you out of the armory. So I think that you could have very easily sold the Ogre Head a helm which moves on its own and is large and ostentatious. I feel like this would have been very easy to sell to Takeda Shingen or Oda Nobunaga or anyone like that. They would have really liked this idea.
Every time I see this art, I can't help but imagine it, like how it moves, and it's just way too spider-like for my comfort.
No one knows how big it is.
It's got a little creep factor to it, yeah.
How big is it?
I don't know. This scale
like, does
question.
it fit on
There's
your
no scale
desk?
birds or anything.
It's not clear.
Like, if you wanted to, could you actually put it on your head? Does it like fit over your face, or does it clutch you with the little legs?
Well, that's terrifying.
It just clamps on yeah. No one knows.
I like that in chat. It hops like a goat.
Great. I really needed to imagine that too.
Exactly. Okay, we are nearing the end of some of the planned questions that I have for Emily and Mendez. I have a couple more I'm going to ask them, but now is the time. If you have questions that you would like to ask about hopping helmets or anything else in the set, go ahead and put them in chat. It's going to be a little easier if you tag @magic for me. That'll make them stand out so I can write them down. But go ahead and start putting those in chat and we'll answer as many as we can. But in the meantime, Emily, I was curious. So there's in a set full of callbacks, Kyodai, the soul of Kamigawa, it's one of the few characters that's still around from 1,200 years ago. But it looks a little different. So what did we do to update the look on Kyodai?
I mean, Kyodai only really showed up on one card in original Kamigawa, and it was as a stone tablet in that which was taken. Yeah, so Kyodai didn't really have any previous appearance that we were going off of. They did get mentioned. She did get mentioned in the end of the novel. I think she was like humanish, dragonish. But we were basically free to design her looks as we wanted. And we wanted it to be like, I mean, she's the guardian of Kamigawa, right? Like all of Kamigawa. So we wanted it to draw from both like historical and like this future modern-ish both sides. So she's got this like dragonish appearance, like a callback to the fact that she used to be part of Okagachi. And then she's like, like kami designs can get pretty weird, right? So her weirdness is she's made completely of arms. like if you zoom in on the art really quickly, it's probably harder to see in the card because like card art can be pretty small. but like
Oh, those
her
are
gold
arms.
body, yeah, those are all like human arms just overlapping each other.
Oh,
Not
that's
actual
weird.
human arms. She doesn't like cut them off of humans and stick them onto herself, but those are human arms. Um, yeah, and she also like we also wanted to get this sort of like, you know, like the hanging wired in cyborg sort of look to her. So she's got these cables trailing off of her back and hooking on up into the ceiling.
Hmm.
Get some of the more futuristic vibes in there too. Like
Very
this is, I
cool.
think this is one of my favorite arts in the set, like in the main set. So
Yeah,
I love all the detail in there.
very cool.
Oops.
All right, James, last question for you, and then we'll do one for Emily, and then we'll go to some fan questions. Um, Upriser Renegade has an interesting look to him.
Oh
What
yeah.
what is going on with that card? And kind of a companion question: who are the Asari Uprisers? If we can definitely
Right.
show that card, Sean.
So I remember the first time that I learned about this. It was in a dance class. It was in a dance anthropology class that I was in college. I minored in dance, and one of the things I remember reading a paper about was about how rockabilly never really died in Japan. And there were these dancers in Harajuku who would dress like what we would call greasers, I guess, in the United States.
Hmm.
So there's all these guys in Harajuku dancing out in public, dressed like Arthur Fonzarelli and the Outsiders and them, with especially with the pompadour that you see here. Um, and their dancing is very distinctive and characterized by moving back and forth between freeze framing on cool poses, the same way that a kabuki actor might, but in a rockabilly context instead. So he's part of the Asari uprisers, who are the red faction. They're based out of these mountain strongholds where they had these big industrial forges. And the Asari uprisers. They have a problem with the Imperials, and they also don't really trust the Cyberfuturists. So they're kind of a populist uprising movement. They're based on historical Japanese like revolutionary leagues. They're called Ikki. They appeared various times throughout Japanese history, but in the Warring States period, for example, there were a couple of revolutionary leagues which were very powerful and distinctive. One was the Iga Provincial League, which is
Hmm.
where we get a lot of our like ninja mythology from. The Iga province, as I mentioned before, has this mountainous broken terrain, not a lot of huge fields and rice paddies. There's a lot of people who had really advanced like hunting and forestry and mountaineering skills. And there were smaller landowners who made agreements with farmers and other peasants who lived in the area to resist the samurai landowners who were a much bigger deal outside the valley and who had access to these gigantic rice fields and had much more resources as a result. So they were eventually defeated by Oda Nobunaga in the Tenjo Iga War, but after that, the rangers and foresters of Iga got a reputation as sort of mercenary ninja, which
Hmm.
was partly real, partly invented. And then there was another Iki, the Iko Iki, which was the only truly populist movement in the Japanese Warring States period. This is the only one where peasants actually controlled land for a long time. And this group was based around a populist Buddhist movement, the in the True Pure Land sect, which is now, even now, I think is still the biggest Buddhist sect in Japan. Um, and they believed that by chanting a certain invocation to Amitabha Buddha, you were guaranteed it when you died. If you died in service of Buddhism, you would go to the Pure Land, which is kind of Buddhist heaven, and it may be metaphorical or it may not, but they're not super clear about it. Um, and so they raised these gigantic armies including some with peasants in charge, which also resisted samurai rule for a really long time until again Oda Nobunaga eventually defeated them. So you're going to see a lot of like Ashigaru type rank and file samurai in the Asari uprisers, and they're drawing on those traditions of revolutionary leagues.
All right. Okay. Last question for Emily before we get to fan questions. So at the beginning of all the Kamigawa hype, we kind of kicked things off with 10 saga stories, short stories, based on some of the sagas that were in the set. But we didn't cover all of the sagas in the set. But what about kind of the flip side of that? Were there any stories from Kamigawa lore that you had wanted to make into sagas but didn't quite make it?
Yeah, there was. I mean, there's still a lot of cool stuff that happened in the novels that we didn't get to reference too much in the cards, like Hidetsugu pillaging Minamo, the Wizard Academy, and
Mm-hmm.
made up a bunch of stories too. My favorite is one about like the kitsune outwitting the Aki. Um, yeah, there's, I mean, like 1,200 years. That's a lot of history. We get to make up a
It's a
lot of
little bit
stuff
of
that
time.
happened in the intervening time. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's get to some fan questions. We have about 18 minutes left, and we have a good number of fan questions from social and from chat. Feel free to keep putting them in chat for those of you who are watching. Let's try. Okay, and this probably for Emily. So let's start there. It says, not a specific question. I'd love to hear more about the building of Sekenzen, its power structures, the community in it, how it interacts with places other than Iganjo. It was unfortunately sidelined in the main story, and I need more info.
So the idea behind Second Senshi was that it's this community, this really self-reliant and independent community of artisans, right? They live in this rugged mountainous terrain. They don't have access to all the resources that you would in a major city or in Eganjo. So they've learned to be very resilient and to rely on themselves. And they have this ethos of reuse. Um, uh, they take scraps that someone in another city might just see as trash and throw it away, and then they figure out how to rework it and repurpose it. And we kind of got into that in some of the armor design for the uprisers, who are a really big presence in Sekken Senshi. How they have the
Mm-hmm.
kintsugi cracks in their armor. Um, and it's really, and how they really like take pride in the things that they make. And um, there are even some artisans who make it a point of pride to build completely from scraps. Like they will refuse to use any new materials, stuff that hasn't already been, tempered or proven in some way before.
Very cool. All right, let's see. Next, I'm going to try to jump back and forth between chat questions and social questions just so that we can hit both spaces. So next one probably going to be for Emily as well. And this may predate your time at Wizards. I'm not sure. Time is a construct. Nobody has any idea what year it is. But since when, or for how long was the Wanderer planned out? So this was the big reveal of who the Wanderer is, her place in the larger ecosystem of things. But we had hinted at the Wanderer before. Do you recall how long this reveal has been in the works?
um, as soon as we decided this set was going to be Kamigawa, we were like,
Okay.
we need to figure out who the planeswalkers in the set are. Do we need to create some more new planeswalkers, or is there someone existing who we can sit on with? This does predate me, but I'm but I think the Wanderer was created first without any. Well, no, I know the Wanderer was created first without any idea that um, they were from Kamigawa. So
Hmm.
yeah, that wasn't
All right.
decided. This was not really something planned out beforehand.
Fair enough. That is the chicken and the egg. All right, next question, and this can be for either Emily or Mendez. A big conflict between the Imperials and the Futurists was was about the regulation of tech, but it wasn't totally clear to me how that pans out on an institutional or bureaucratic level. I would like info on what the Imperials consider proper procedure and how that compares to the Futurists.
I've been talking for a bit, so if you want to.
Oh, I was gonna have to ask you for help on this one also.
Oh, okay.
So, but the if I recall correctly, some of the conflict has to do with where magic power comes from and who should be in charge of the merge gates. Is that right?
So the Imperials started because of like the mergings that are happening throughout the world. They're the ones who are like going out and enforcing Kyodai's not will really, but like doing Kyodai's bidding, helping manage the mergers and make sure that people aren't interfering with them in some way. And then that has like as time that was how they originally started, and then as time passed, they sort of expanded their policies under the rationale of like, well, we need to make sure things are stable so that so that the two worlds can continue to merge without issue. If people are running around using technology however they like, it makes things unstable, and if instability happens, then it's bad for all of us. So that's where a lot of their idea of like we want to regulate technology comes in from. And then the futurists are on the other end of that, of like, well, this is all cool and awesome, and why can't we just keep pushing to see what else we can do? And that's where they come into conflict. It's like how much can we keep pushing and experimenting versus how much do we need to play it safe to not upset the natural, not the natural order, but like to just keep things going as they are.
All right. Okay,
Sorry, I ended up answering the
do
whole
this.
thing.
Oh no, that's great. That was
No, I
great.
think that's
We'll do this next question for James. So let's see. This one came from chat. What are weapons used by mercenaries skipping kunais?
skipping Okay.
Kunais.
Oh yeah. A kunai is that's a Japanese garden trowel.
Okay.
Yeah, just any kind of like planting that you're doing by hand, you need a kunai to do that with. Very important tradition of garden design in Japan, going back to the first recorded garden manual, the Sakutaiki.
Mm-hmm.
But also in pop culture, ninja sharpen them and throw them at people. It's complicated. There was a rumor that the shogun's gardeners in the Edo period were secret ninja. No one can really prove it, but everyone thought that was cool, and people have been running with it ever since. But weapons used by mercenaries. So in Kamigawa, it's anything and everything. Um, in real Japanese history, so a lot of the mercenary groups worked as skirmishers or scouts, like the aforementioned Igamono. They used a lot of spear weapons and a lot of staff weapons that could be easily concealed. Like there's old designs of like staves with hidden blades in them that they'd use for sneaking around, and then these hooked spears, which the rumor was that they could like swing from branch to branch using the hook on the spear. Um, which doesn't really sound like it works with physics. But again, it was such an awesome idea that everyone just ran with it.
Mm-hmm.
There are also some records of Europeans being hired by mercenaries, like during the Shimabara Rebellion. The shogunate hired a Dutch gunship to bombard Shimabara Castle with its cannons. I think the Dutch took the money and then kind of didn't. They kind of phoned in the job. Um, like they didn't really try very hard. Their hearts weren't in it.
Hmm.
So yeah, so there's a so historically it's a lot of things, but if we're looking at the Ega mercenaries, then like concealable weapons, weapons that could be used for climbing, and then of course any kind of pole weapon, which was always the most popular thing in Japan. All of those were very commonly used. Um, but in Kamigawa, they probably just have swords because there's too many swords.
James, we'll stay with you for this next one, which came to us through Twitter. Was the plot of the Imperials versus Uprisers inspired by the, I'm going to mispronounce this, Meiji Restoration or the Meiji era? A lot of the storyline reminds me of this period.
I so I didn't come up with this idea myself, but I think that um, yes, in part, but but when we first started talking about the uprisers, like it very quickly grew to become much more than that. But
Hmm.
yeah, like the Bakumatsu period and that idea of like pro-imperial and anti-imperial agitation, leading to like social change that that affected all of Japan. And also these like populist uprisings. I think that the Meiji Restoration did influence that to some degree, but then
Hmm.
um, I'm personally I've personally done more research into like the older stuff, so that's when the traditional revolutionary leagues became a bigger influence.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's move back to a question from chat, and this one will go to Emily. Do Zuberas still exist in the current world of Kamigawa?
Yes.
Okay.
Mendez looks confused.
I don't know what those are.
Zuberas were
I'm new to this.
creatures in yeah, they were creatures in the original Kamigawa that basically they had an effect that would happen if they died that would get bigger the more Zuberas died. So like if at the same time.
So I said yes, but it's more of the more
Wait,
accurate
didn't they
answer
die
is
though?
I think they were
did
spirits.
they? They're kami, so I don't. They could still
Oh,
be around. It's just
Hmm.
so the longer, more accurate answer is we had a lot of uh, goals and a lot of that we wanted with the set and a lot of designs we were trying to fit in and
Hmm.
some things and a lot of callbacks too and some things just did not end up making it in the set. So if they're not in the set, it's not definitively stated whether they're still around, but that also means we haven't definitively said that they're not.
Right.
My head canon is yes, they are. So
All right. Okay. So this next question, I know we've been bouncing back and forth between chat and social media, but we have a bonus here. This one's been asked word for word the same in both spots, so I'm guessing it's the same human doing the asking. But it's also a really great question. So the Kami feel very different in Neon Dynasty than in the original block. I was curious about the decisions around changing how they look and how they work with mortals. Can you say more about this decision? Either one of you.
yeah, yeah. Part of it was like the original designs were pretty out there, and we wanted to keep that too, but also make them a bit more resonant, make them a bit more recognizable. Um, and the idea behind it is that the worlds are starting to merge, and there isn't like this barrier keeping them apart anymore. So the forms of the kami are taking now that you see are closer to what their true forms would be. And the forms that they were in original Kamigawa was like the forms they were sort of forced or twisted into after having to, force themselves through this barrier between the two worlds.
Mm-hmm. All right.
The
Good.
the so the one of the most important things to me about Kamigawa, like thematically and coming from a cultural consulting perspective, was that in Orientalism, there's this idea that cultures outside the Western mainstream kind of get frozen in time at a point that Europe and America find aesthetically pleasing, and the Orientalist imagination kind of freezes them there as the rest of the world goes on without them. So we wanted, in addition to creating a cosmology that's closer to the way that Japanese religion imagines spirits, like living in the same world as humans, we also wanted to make sure we depicted spirits moving forward in time and growing and changing the same way that humans and technology did.
Oh yeah, so so we see some kami that are very obviously more modern in their design. What's the one? The back of the saga. I don't remember what it's called.
The
The blue saga, the
modern era.
Yeah,
Mhm.
the creature that's on the back of that. Wait, no, that's not a kami, is it? Actually, it is. I think it's creature type
I think it's
spirit.
a spirit. Yeah, I think so.
Mhm.
Producer Sean may be able to pull up the back of the modern era, and we'll see.
I mean,
Well,
yeah.
he looks for that. So we are almost out of time. I want to get to one last question. First of all, there's still a bunch of great questions, so thank you everyone for who put questions in chat. I'm trying to pick who's the winner. Let's try
Something for Mendez.
something for Mendez. That's more story. That's okay. Well, we'll see who can answer this one. This maybe Mendez. It probably is more Emily, but why are the shrines creatures? So obviously we've had shrines as this enchantment type for the longest time, and they were enchantments. Now they're creatures. Why that shift?
Because there's something living in there, right?
It's I think you can talk about this, the whole like kami living within their shrines thing. Called
Yeah,
dens.
yeah. So the word Goshintai refers to the physical object or the physical feature which a god inhabits. So sometimes that's a man-made object, and then sometimes it's a physical object. If you're in Japan and you ever see like white ropes going around a tree, that means there's a god that lives, a kami that lives inside that tree. So please don't chop it down or carve your name on it or anything. Um, so yeah, creature represents the fact that there are both physical and spirit elements. It's a spirit inhabiting a physical form, and so that's why it's a creature now.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right. That is all we have time for. We have the back of the modern era as well, real quick. Producer Sean whispered in my ear, so we can answer that question real quick. There it is.
Yep,
Vector glider.
Yep. Spirit.
Yep. And I see what you're saying about the more modern design for the spirit.
Yeah, that one's a bit on the on one end of the spectrum. Actually, I think a better example would probably be the Kodama of the West tree. I think it is. That's in the set. Um, it's like a nature kami like all the other Kodamas, but it's got like the neon glows and the little bits of tech included in it. There you go. Yeah, definitely some modern updates to the Kodama design there.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are out of time. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Mendez, for coming on and informing us all about a ton of stuff behind the scenes for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Thank you to everyone in chat who came and chatted with us and listened and learned and shared your questions. We didn't get to everything. Hopefully, we can find other ways to answer your great questions in other spaces. Next week we are going to be back with another show where we're going to share a bunch of upcoming dates. It's kind of a mini announcement stream that I'm calling monthly announcement day by weekly MTG for the year 2020, because why not? But yeah, we'll have next week's stream will be a little bit more informative and newsy. But I hope you enjoyed this one where we explored some of the world building behind Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and we'll see you next week.